Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly. It's April 8th, 2021, and before we get rolling on our whistleblower stories for this week, Brian has a few things for you.
Hi, Kevin. Good to be back with you and everybody watching. Thanks for joining us. Just make sure that you are following Shadowproof wherever you are watching today. And also remember that we are a 100% reader-funded outlet. If you're watching on YouTube, you can click to donate throughout the broadcast. You can also go to dissenter.substack.com to check out Kevin's newsletter that we'll touch on at the end of the show. And yeah, anything you can chip in, that's how we pay our writers. It's how we keep the website running. And we appreciate your support. With that being said, let's go right ahead here. Kevin, we have our first story. A former employee says that Transocean nearly caused an oil rig catastrophe during Hurricane Zeta. What happened with this story?
Yeah, and so this isn't technically a whistleblower story. However, due to the employee's civil lawsuit, we're able to learn some important details about what happened. And I felt like featuring this in the Dissenter newsletter this past week. So this went out to everyone who has subscribed to the newsletter. And Transocean was involved in the Deepwater Horizon disaster back in 2010. I know we have Transocean, Triton, and a firm known as Beacon Offshore Energy. And at the core of what was complained about by this crew member who was on the Deepwater Asgard out in the Gulf of Mexico, at its core is this devotion to profits that we know is a hallmark of capitalism. And as Hurricane Zeta was bearing down upon the Gulf of Mexico on October 27th, they were making moves on this vessel to do what was necessary to disconnect from the deep water well. And they were following, I presume, the same kinds of procedures that they would typically follow in an emergency or a weather emergency. They were taking care of their safety, and they were told by Transocean and Triton that they did not want to stop production. They wanted to delay disconnecting from the deep water well. They did not want that disruption to take place. The United States Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement is supposed to be regulating what happens with offshore drilling, aside from the fact that I think principally I'm opposed to any sort of drilling of oil and gas off the coasts, given the climate calamity that lies ahead if we continue that kind of extraction. But let's just focus on what could have gone wrong here if they did not have crew members who were able to navigate this incident. Because what is claimed by this crew member is that there was essentially disrepair on the part of this vessel, that it was not kept in the kind of shape necessary in order to make sure that there weren't disasters. We're very fortunate that there wasn't a lot of oil that gushed out into the Gulf, just like back in 2010. We were lucky that there weren't any deaths because, according to this crew member, Christopher Pleasant, they were ordered to unlatch their vessel on October 28th as the hurricane was now right on top of them. There's really nowhere for them to go. The current was now too fast. It was impossible to control. And according to Pleasant, he claims that the vessel lost an engine and began to take on water in two of the thrusters. engineers aboard the vessel had to rig tarps to stop the water from reaching the remaining thrusters so the captain could control the vessel. There are tension rods that are supposed to operate, but the corporations involved in contracting stopped basically stopped the work that needed to be done after inspections were conducted in 2019. In May of 2020, only 4 or 5 months before this hurricane, there were people who were present to replace these tension rods that are necessary for safety. And it was their decision that they not go ahead with repairs because that would require stopping production. So again, we have this commitment to corporate profits, both during the hurricane and earlier on in 2020, that results in something that could have been really devastating to the Gulf of Mexico once more. I mean, we already have whatever ripple effects have occurred since 2010 because of what happened with Transocean, and then that was BP, the oil company that was involved. But so now in this lawsuit, we have Pleasant alleging that they failed to inspect, monitor, and repair equipment, failed to maintain a safe work environment, failed to provide adequate crew, and that also there were orders issued that directly placed the crew of the deep water Asgard in extreme danger. On a personal level, he says that he's not able to take up any kind of work. I presume that extends to work beyond just offshore drilling enterprises, that because of what he went through, it's caused him severe mental anguish and as a source of trauma, and made him think twice about being this kind of a crew member, even though that's where his experience lies. So there are multiple civil lawsuits like this that are going through the courts. This story was amplified by Peer, this group that we often reference on this show. They're public. They're a public interest group that represents environmental employees in the U.S. government. And they say that this agency has not been transparent with the American public about what went down, and we've heard very little. It's Biden's administration. We have somebody in the Interior Department, Deb Haaland, who could be a good voice in challenging this kind of corruption, but we've yet to hear any kind of public statement about this, even though it was a near catastrophe.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's move on to our next story here. We have another story related to the environment. Colorado groups are demanding the governor fire the air pollution control director after a whistleblower complaint. Tell us a little bit about this campaign.
Yeah, and you might recall, if you're following the show, that last week we covered the reporting from the Colorado Sun about this very story. And then this is the fallout. These are the groups that are demanding some kind of action. They would like Governor Jared Polis to fire this state director. They would also like an investigation to be conducted. And they say things like, the co-chair of the Colorado Latino Forum says this is our Flint, Michigan, because there were records about pollution that were falsified, and it's unclear what kind of impact that has had on families, on communities, what has been allowed to be basically polluted for, as what they're pointing to there, what has been impacted as a result of the speeding of permits that took place by this state director and then the wider agency. They've called for other removals of officials. They've called for an investigation into official misconduct. This was part of a complaint to the Environmental Protection Agency. And of course, when this was unfolding last year, the Environmental Protection Agency was entirely in the capture of fossil fuel corporations. And that was because Donald Trump had people who were effectively lobbyists. Scott Pruitt was a lobbyist from Oklahoma, not registered one, but in his actions, he was serving the gas and oil companies. And also Andrew Wheeler had a background as a coal lobbyist, and he succeeded Scott Pruitt. And that isn't exactly the case now. And the EPA certainly it's believed can take up these issues more seriously. This kind of conflict of interest problems do not exist as brazenly. And so, Colorado groups have outlined the kind of action that needs to be taken. And they refer to a Suncor refinery that is implicated in air and ground pollution. They want tougher state action. And I know from loosely following what has gone on in Colorado that there have been moves by groups to ban fracking, that there's been efforts on the part of environmental groups to do more to fight the climate, especially as people are to protect the climate, because warming is a real issue. It being, especially in Denver, you have a mile-high city, the exposure to sunlight and what it can mean as for people's physical health, that's something that they've been trying to fight and struggle against. But their industry is very influential over both of the political parties, and they're able to obstruct a referendum if it's put on the ballot. And so these environmental groups fighting back do really have an uphill battle, because the industry does have its way for the most part when it comes to obtaining these permits. And so this is an important story. This is something that will keep following as there's fallout from the revelations we're learning that came from whistleblowers alleging these illegal permits.
Thank you, Kevin. Our next story, as we are all anxiously awaiting the union vote results, we have the NLRB says that Amazon is illegally firing whistleblowers. Walk us through this story.
Right, and the NLRB is somewhat involved, or there to oversee the vote for this union, if I understand everything correctly. And so now you've got the NLRB saying that Maren Costa and Emily Cunningham, who were part of Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, were illegally fired. They issued a ruling. They're acknowledging what has been reported, that both of these people were targeted because of their organizing in 2019 against Amazon's climate policies. They are recognizing that they were targeted because they promoted a shareholders resolution, which urged Amazon to take action to fight the, as it's put in reporting, the global climate emergency. And both of these individuals, both of these employees that were fired, criticized Amazon on Twitter. That they were also willing to match donations to warehouse workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were hearing all about the risks to safety at these plants, at these fulfillment centers. They were fired in April 2020, about 1 year ago, almost exactly. And so now that they've upheld their version of events, this is really important for both of these whistleblowers. Cunningham called this a moral victory. And the news is, as you set this up, coming while we witness Amazon aggressively fighting and attempting to thwart workers in Bessemer, Alabama, they are all trying to form a union. Michael Sanato, who is a frequent contributor to Shadowproof, has a report in The Guardian about the hundreds of ballots which Amazon is contesting. They've been really vicious through their PR department, going after politicians who back up workers, and they're organizing. Mark Perrone, who is the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, was quoted by GeekWire telling everyone that Amazon will break the law to silence workers. He said that Amazon's illegal retaliation against these whistleblowers makes the Amazon union election in Alabama even more urgent as Bessemer employees exercise their right to make their voices heard. So this, I think, adds to why there needs to be unionizing, why these drives at Amazon facilities are important. It's not like Amazon respects workers, especially when it comes to so-called free speech rights, if you want to call it that. They are known for retaliating against people who go out in public and talk about the company. I think they even claim that there's some kind of informal or formal agreement that says you will not speak ill of Amazon. And so that is something that they will turn against people who are raising good faith issues with Amazon. So as we await the outcome of the union vote and see what will happen in Bessemer, we can be pleased that the NLRB is upholding this version of events, which we know is reality and not the reality that Amazon would like us to see.
Thank you very much. A high-ranking research manager for Google AI resigns in protest. What is the story here?
Yeah, so actually, go ahead and take that Chiron down, because I have a slightly different angle for this story,
right,
which I unfortunately did not get into the broadcast to change. That story is important, but we don't exactly know why that Google AI person left just yet, or they haven't spoken out. But what I did find was a related story around Google that involves an asset management firm named Trillium, which filed a shareholder resolution with Apple. With Alphabet. Alphabet is the parent company of Google, and this shareholder resolution's an interesting resolution because they call attention to the corporation's retaliation against workers. In it, it is noted that in December 2020, again, we have the National Labor Relations Board, that they alleged Google illegally fired and surveilled employees involved in labor organizing. They went on to allege that there was interference and restraining and coercion of employees in the exercising of their rights. This resolution refers to turmoil within the so-called ethical AI team. Yes, Google still calls them ethical, even though they have gotten rid of or forced out Dr. Timnit Gebru, which we highlighted here on the show, what happened with her. She is somebody who took issue with the way that facial recognition was being designed and pushed by Google. The resolution adds, quoting suggests that many Google employees who have resigned or been fired, including executives, publicly report retaliation after voicing implications of company practices, including systemic workplace racism and sexism, and projects enabling censorship, surveillance, and war. And it quotes an employee that resigned who said, "I'm proud of what I did, and I believe everyone has a right to know what their work is being used for." That person was protesting Google's contract with Customs and Border Protection. That does involve artificial intelligence. They asked the shareholder, Trillium, asked that a third party conduct a review of Google's whistleblower policies and to make recommendations on improving them so red flags like these do not continue. And naturally, we can guess why a shareholder would want this to happen. They are concerned that government fines are going to pile up, that we will see lawsuits that damage the profitability and reputation of Google. So they're asking Google to take action now, before they're on the other side, which is where they definitely are heading. It definitely seems like Google is heading down the route where it's going to require shaming in order to get them to be a different corporation. They used to have the mantra of don't be evil, but ever since they got rid of it, they're leaning hard into a future where their use of artificial intelligence is about making money and much less about the ethical considerations of pioneering certain technology. So we will obviously continue with both these companies, with Google, with Amazon, any of these Silicon Valley tech companies. I think it's really important that we not forget, because I think some of the risks that can come to people who speak out at these corporations almost mirror the kinds of risks that people face in U.S. government agencies, simply because these corporations are just so powerful and influential in the Western world.
Thank you, Kevin. Our last story, if you want to call it one, is about Mr. Daniel Ellsberg, who turns 90 today. What would you like to say about Dan Ellsberg?
So he turned 90 yesterday on April 7th, but we don't have a show on Wednesday, and I wanted to wish Daniel Ellsberg a happy birthday. Making it to 90 years is an accomplishment for any human. I could only dream of making it to that ripe age. And so being 90 years young, let's celebrate Daniel. And for those who maybe aren't as familiar with Dan as we are, I'll just basically say that in 1967, Daniel Ellsberg worked on the top secret study authorized by Pentagon Secretary Robert McNamara. It was called U.S. Decision Making in Vietnam, 1945 to 68. This 7,000-page study, which he provided to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, became known as the Pentagon Papers. He blew the whistle on the Vietnam War. He challenged it at a time when anti-war activism was on the rise, and he provided copies to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and 17 other newspapers. He faced 12 felony counts and a possible sentence that could have resulted in life in prison. His case is considered one of the first major cases of a media source being prosecuted under the Espionage Act. It's practically the model for the Justice Department in their war on whistleblowers today. Ultimately, the case against him was dismissed as a result of governmental misconduct under President Nixon's administration. Ellsberg has gone on to speak and participate in many events. He's frequently given speeches in the last 20 to 30 years. I've interviewed him. He's outspoken on the threat of nuclear war. He's a peace advocate, and he's almost always there when the next whistleblower comes forward and faces prosecution and needs public support. If you haven't read The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner, or his memoir, which is Secrets, a memoir of Vietnam and the Pentagon Papers, then I suggest that you do yourself a favor and request it from your library or buy a copy through your local bookstore. And so with that, happy birthday to you, Dan, and we hope to continue to hear from you in either virtually or perhaps in person after everyone is successfully vaccinated.
Thank you, Kevin. Why don't you wrap up here and tell us a little bit about what's going on with the newsletter?
Yeah, so if you go to dissenter.substack.com, you can become a subscriber of the Dissenter newsletter. This is where we have both free and exclusive posts about whistleblower stories from the past week, updates on Julian Assange's case, Reality Winner's case, other people who are in prison. Lately, we are following the case of Daniel Hale, who recently pled guilty to violating the Espionage Act, a drone whistleblower, the first whistleblower to be convicted under President Joe Biden's administration. And we await the news of the appeal, if there's going to be a cross appeal from Julian Assange's legal team, or any details we might be able to glean from the U.S. government on why they believe they should win and prevail in court on their appeal over a district judge that denied the extradition of Assange back in January. So if you subscribe to this newsletter and stay connected that way, you're going to be one of the first people. You're going to be some of the first to know what is going on with the Assange case and these other cases. So I encourage you to support this independent journalism and pulling back. If Brian wants to come back in to the show, I can recommend that people go to Shadowproof this week and read the article we just published by Will Lennon, who is someone who put together a very good, thorough, detailed report about the border industrial complex that has to do with that, looking at Anduril, this tech firm that has a arrangement with the Customs and Border Protection for constructing surveillance towers at the U.S.-Mexico border that are being fueled by artificial intelligence in order to track migrants. And this is part of the virtual wall, this virtual wall that Joe Biden says he is for. We've seen the dichotomy develop where conservatives want to build like a brick and mortar, like use concrete to have a physical wall. That was Trump's thing. He wants to have an actual barrier. And meanwhile, what Democrats and some of their liberal supporters seem to prefer and support is a wall that just involves smart technology that Silicon Valley corporations can make money off of, and they think will be effective. And so as Brian pulls it up, I highly encourage you to go read this report. It's a very excellent feature, and we're proud at Shadowproof that we're able to fund and publish this journalism, that we give space to this. And it's, I think, something that challenges the dominant policy for immigration on the part of Joe Biden. We're seeing a lot of ugly headlines about the number of children and migrants that are being rounded up and deported. And I think this is something we need to do more to grapple with. And Will gives us this report to help us deal with what is going on at our border.
Yep, thanks. I think that was a really good summary of it. And we linked to some of the documents that Will obtained here in the piece about the construction contracts that the government has signed with Anduril. And we have another piece on this subject coming up next week with Will, a second installment, diving deeper into Anduril and who they are and sort of the origin story behind them, which is really interesting. If you're the kind of person who has read up a lot about Palantir and Silicon Valley VCs and Peter Thiel and the militarization of the border, this is definitely a story that you're going to want to check out at Shadowproof. So make sure you're following Will too. I think he's at Will Kosh, Kosh, on Twitter. You can find his story and his handle through the Shadowproof Twitter account. And yeah, please read the story and share it and let us know what you think.
So one more quick thing, and then we will sign off. So thank you to everyone who tuned in while we were broadcasting live. David mentions the National Bird documentary is a good feature about Daniel Hale and other drone whistleblowers. In fact, that film by Sonia Kennebec captured moments. She spoke to Daniel at the time that the FBI had raided his home, it wasn't known that he was going to be indicted at that moment under the Espionage Act, but it was clear the FBI was investigating him. And she's now the director of United States versus Reality Winner, a documentary that premiered at SXSW last month. I'm working on a review that I'll soon publish. And so, yes, it is a very solid documentary about drone whistleblowing. So something to throw out there. All right, with that, thank you all for tuning into the show, and I'll let Brian sign us off.
Yeah, thank you everybody for listening and tuning in. Remember to follow us, and if you like our work, if you want to support this show and Kevin's work, you can definitely do that at shadowproof.com/donate or by signing up to Kevin's newsletter at Substack. And you will also get to support wonderful journalism like what we showed you from Will Lennon earlier just a few moments ago. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Take care.